So, present mode. Okay, hopefully you can all see that. Thank you, right, so thanks for coming. Hopefully I'm not the only sort of sci-fi and Doctor Who geek in this call. As you can tell, I have kind of dressed appropriately for the part. And I'm just going to get stuck into the big question. Why am I doing this? Why am I actually standing here waving at the internet, hoping that people are interested in trying to listen? Well, at my core, when you boil everything away, I am a glorified Boy Scout. I'm also part Italian because I cannot stop moving when I talk, so you might see me moving around. And this is obviously my Gallifreyan time-traveling merit badge. You know, I'm a glorified scout, and I love seeing ideas hit people because I like to help people, and I like to see how people improve and teams improve because they see a new idea, it's integrated into their psyche, and they are suddenly better and suddenly improved. And it's this drive to help people is what led me down the career path that I've taken. I'm now a coach, an agile coach. I've been a coach for a while. Which brings me on to this session. You know, this session was about being an agile team member and the companion's guide to being an agile team member. And I think what I've just said is the core of what it means to be a good member of an agile team. The drive, the desire to help the rest of your team, your teammates, be the best people that they can be, and collectively as a team, you're the best that you can be. So this book on the right-hand side, this thing over here, and oh yes, I love the gadgets. Gadgets are cool. My purpose for this session is to help you guys in this call start to write your own copy of this book on the right-hand side. It's not about me transmitting a bunch of ideas. It's about you being able to come up with things that will help your teams get better. So for that to work, I have an ask of everyone. I need you to engage and contribute because I need you to be able to think about your teams, bring them into the room with you. I know it's slightly weird in Corona times. You really should be self-isolated, but other than that, bring these people into the room with you so that anything that you hear in this session could give you clues, ideas, options to try out so that your team can get better. So that's what some of the exercises are designed to do, to try and get you to think about sort of certain things. And because this is based on a sci-fi, longest running sci-fi series out there, I have structured this talk in the form of episodes. And episode 1 is the really big one. It's the fact that the Doctor always changes. These are most of the faces of the Doctor. There are a couple of notable exceptions, one from a while ago and one quite recently, probably more in the future as well. And as a companion, it's very disconcerting if your team lead, your figurehead, suddenly changes and is suddenly not the face that you've grown accustomed to. And that change brings uncertainty, and that uncertainty causes stress. Now, if you look at all the agile guidance that's out there, everything talks about agile teams responding to change, embracing change, actively seeking out change. But how does that work on a human level? How do we as people behave in that way of being willing and able to run out and seek change wherever it may be found? And to understand how we can go about doing this, and therefore how we can help others to embrace change and kind of actively deal with change, I think we've got to look at how humans are and how human needs behave and how we rely on our needs to help us understand what to do. And whenever I think about anything, I like models. I use models to help me organize my thoughts. And there are a couple of models I use quite regularly when I think about human needs. The one on the left is pretty much the really well-known. It's so well-known, it's now appeared as random memes that involve Wi-Fi and battery. Because Maslow first published this stuff, I think in the 40s, like 42 or 43, something like that, a very long time ago. And the fortune cookie version of how Maslow's hierarchy of needs work is it's all about being driven by shortfalls in needs rather than being driven to indulge in excess of a need. And if you've got shortfalls in needs lower down the structure, you are far more likely to try and satisfy those and not necessarily satisfy needs a long way up. That's essentially how this is supposed to be used and consumed. An example, if you've got physiological needs, like you don't know where your next meal is coming from, you're probably not that interested in being recognized as employee of the month or words to that effect. And it's not just the basic physiological needs about sustaining life. There are other things which also operate at the physiological level. Things like chemical addictions, drug addictions, they could overwhelm your interest in love and friendship and, you know, the desire to be everything it can be if you're just trying to meet this craving. So that's the well-known model. There's another model I quite like using, and that's slightly less well-known, and it was produced by a guy called Anthony Robbins about 15 to 20-ish years ago, something like that. He produced a TED Talk in 2006 about why we do the things that we do. I think that was the title, words to that effect. And I think it was one of the first TED Talks, but I'm not certain of that. And his model was more about thinking about needs as a set of balancing forces, and an equilibrium state is required for a human to be truly content. His model has 4 needs of the personality, around certainty and variety, and 2 needs of the soul. So if you look at and compare and contrast these two, there is clearly a lot of overlap because we're still talking about the same people. But there's some elements which are much more visible in Tony's model and not quite as visible in Maslow's, like certainty and variety. You know, the need for variety is what drives people to suddenly have a midlife crisis, or for very sensible people to suddenly take up skydiving for a thrill. It's the need for excitement. Certainty in the Maslow model is more about assurances and certainty in various other needs that are in there, rather than certainty in its own element. But Tony talks about making sure that there is a reasonable balance across all of these needs, and overweight or underweight in one need will drive you to kind of correct that balance. So how do we use these needs? Well, we have to understand what the shortfalls are. And the next thing to come up to talk about is the little stylized icon of me in the bottom left. Before we can really understand how to solve a need shortfall, you know, how do we cope with the uncertainty in our lives, you know, potentially by boosting the level of certainty if you look at Tony's model. But where we find the need gaps and where we apply the additional need boosting elements depends on where you fit on a work-life balance sort of scale, which is what the bottom thing is. On one extreme of this scale, you've got the segregators, the people where work is work and life is life, and you know, never the two shall meet, entirely separate entities. And on the other end of the scale, there's people like me where work and life just blur into one great big mush. And if you're not careful, you could work your entire life, or you could just live and not actually bother doing anyway. There is no difference from as far as you're concerned. And that has advantages and disadvantages. Both of the extreme ends have advantages and disadvantages. If you're the integrated type, fully integrated type, it might be possible to boost your psychological safety by boosting your need requirements in a home context, and that could help you deal with uncertainty in a work context. The downside with being a highly integrated person is that stresses in one part of the world could quite easily bleed into the other. So it's not all great. Similarly, with the segregated kind of person, the fact that you have lots of stresses and difficulties at work might not actually make any material have any material effects on your private life. But it also means that in order to solve the uncertainty challenges at work, you're going to have to solve them at work rather than being able to offset it. And what you can see on the screen here are just some ways of trying to make it easier for a person to deal with the stress that uncertainty causes. First one's the balancing stuff I've talked about. It's also possible to start looking at what the implications of this uncertainty is. Because if the uncertainty results in a lot of effort, whatever effort means, it could mean emotional effort, it could be psychological effort, it could be physical effort, some form of effort that you as a person has to put into dealing with this difference, this uncertainty, by being able to reduce that by whatever means possible. If you're working in technology, making your decisions smaller, using audited tools like configuration management to help you kind of cope with the fact that things are changing, can make life a little bit easier. But also, there's other stuff, which is just about creating that sense of safety and belonging that's around love and connection, which is where you find the relationship with your teammates. You know, a person who's part of a highly functional, sympathetic team is more able to cope with the fact that there's a whole lot of stress going on in their life. That's the kind of thing that I want you to be thinking about. Hopefully that makes sense. By the way, Karad, if you could just pay attention to the questions as they're coming. I'm quite happy to take questions about the subject as we're going through it, or we can just have a huge wash-up session right at the end. It's entirely how it's going. If you see a question that's really relevant to what I've just been talking about, by all means, bring that in. So that's about kind of coping with uncertainty. And the second episode, the first two are kind of core episodes, is no matter what incarnation you find the Doctor, no matter what his face, or in some cases her face, the Doctor is kind. That pretty much drives everything that he does. And this episode's really cool. This is an episode where Christopher Eccleston, as the Doctor, takes his companion Rose to see her father and to see the day that her father died. And she saves him. And it causes all kinds of problems with reality-busting demons appearing and kind of swallowing up all kinds of realities. Fascinating episode. In the end, her dad works out what's going on and realizes that in order for these problems to go away, he has to die, which is something clearly the Doctor knows, but he did absolutely everything, including sacrificing himself, so that Rose would not have to go through seeing her father die. And that is a kind action. And it's the action that's really important, because kindness is in the actions that you take. It's all about things that people do. A kind thought which doesn't translate into a kind deed is ultimately worthless. It doesn't really do anything. And you create a kind environment by being kind and having kind actions appearing all of the time. Because there's an action, there is a decision that goes with making this action happen. You know, in one extreme it is, will I do the action that is kind, or will I do nothing? Or will I do something that is kind or do something that's cruel? Whatever the choice is, there is a kinder action and a less kinder action. And the really simple trick to being kind is to just make it as easy as possible for you to do the kind thing, and for the rest of the team to do the kind thing when they're presented with a choice. Now, when you think about choices and actions and trying to design these sorts of things, it's really important to think about how nudges work. I think nudge theory has suddenly become a popular thing. It's, I don't know when it first appeared. I first heard about this a while ago now. And for those of you who haven't heard what nudge theory is, or haven't really learned so much about it, nudge theory is essentially, at its heart, about the design of options, design of choices, such that the choice with the better outcome, for some definition of better, it could be more lucrative, more rewarding, more whatever you use to measure better. It's to design those options and present those options in a way that makes it as easy as possible for the decision maker to make the right decision. This thing on the left, it's just awesome. There are loads of YouTube videos that show this. Before this kind of piano staircase was set up, the vast majority of people over a 24-hour period would be using the escalators because they're running all the time, and that's kind of the default behavior, because using the stairs takes additional effort. But then you set this up, and all of a sudden, the escalator use just practically stops because the stairs suddenly look like fun. It's exactly the same thing. You know, you're walking up and down, traveling up and down some height, but all of a sudden the addition of fun just makes it really cool. So that's an example of a nudge, and I absolutely love the one on the right-hand side. Very simple change that WWF kind of came up with and set up in their restrooms, and I think they sell it as well. I can't remember the exact number, but it's the order of a third, just by putting a picture or a cutout of South America and changing the paper from white or blue or whatever it was to green, and giving that nudge that the more paper you use, the more you're destroying the Amazon rainforest, really cuts down on excessive use of paper. Because they were finding that a lot of people were using 2 or 3 sheets of paper, and actually you can dry a hand with 1. That made a massive difference, and no words were used, just that picture, just that visual. Now, these are all cool, but they're all potentially also far away type things, especially depending on where you live, and you might not have metro type environments like this, like the thing on the left. I'm almost certain that every one of you has been exposed to practically insidious levels of nudge theory, because the best place I've seen nudge theory applied to just incredible effects is in supermarkets. You know, when you walk into a supermarket, the entrance, that's where all the cut flowers are. That's where all the fruit and veggies. That just, the smell is lovely. It kind of invites you in. It's a nice, inviting place. And who would want to spend time and money in an inviting place? The bakery section is usually right at the end, just so that every time you get close to the end, the smell of freshly baked stuff just drags you even further into the shop. The expensive things are eye level, because that's the first thing you see, and you've got an anchoring cognitive bias, because the first thing you see is more likely the thing you go back to, especially if you're uncertain about what you're doing. The cheap stuff's right at the bottom and whatever else. And also, I mean, those things are okay, but for me, the borderline evil stuff is the really vibrant sweets and candies and sugary things that you have on the checkout aisles, because that's when your 10-year-old child is at their most powerful and you are at your weakest. Weirdly, batteries do quite well on the checkout aisles as well. Not entirely sure why, but batteries sell really well up there. But anyway, that's nudge theory. How do you use it? But because we were talking about kindness being a habit, and the decisions that you want to make are, you know, should I be kind or should I not be kind? Think about the sorts of nudges that you can use at work with your teams, but tell them that that's what you're trying to do, trying to improve kindness, because otherwise you're potentially just being Machiavellian. To make it easier to have kind acts and to do kind deeds. Simple language changes. You know, we've heard about criticizing work, not the people. Just live that. That works so well. Change your possessive pronouns. You know, that's easy when things are going well. You know, our deliveries really work. Our software has fewer bugs this iteration than last. Whatever it is, collective possessive pronouns become much easier to use when things are going well, but you've got to use them when things are going bad. So it's no longer you screwed up, it's we screwed up. And you've got to take that no matter what happened, and no matter how easy it is to just revert to type, if your type is to kind of name individuals. Random acts of kindness are really good, because it stops becoming quite predictable, because then you stop thinking, oh yes, Monday is kind day. So you want it to be a thing. But also you can have 2 variations. One of my colleagues a while ago, they would occasionally bake a cake and bring it in. And that was brilliant, because not because, you know, a cake was brought in, because you could go to a shop and buy a cake and bring it in. And at the end result, the team still has cake to eat. But the fact that we all knew that she woke up earlier to bake this cake and bring it in, that is awesome. Just that level of effort. So the knowledge that they made this cake is the nudge, as opposed to the actual act itself. So that's quite cool. You've heard the consultants stop using yes but and switch to yes and. That kind of stuff would be lovely. And there are more things. And this is where, you know, you bring your team and you bring your experiences into it, because whatever works for you is the right thing to do. It isn't necessarily just what I've said. So now to episode 3, resilience. For me, I think this is quite possibly the best episode Peter Capaldi has done as the Doctor. I've got to tell you bits of the story just in case you've not heard it. So the Doctor teleports into the strange room in this castle. He kind of knows that he had to go to the teleporter, so it's a prison. At least that's what he thinks it is. And he's going to try and escape. but it's a very strange castle. It's a very strange looking prison because it seems to be a massive maze with rooms everywhere and locked doors all over the place. Very interesting maze. And there's also this weird thing that's trying to kill him, this weird hooded figure that's clearly trying to kill him, and he feels a sense of dread about it. So he's trying to escape the hooded figure and trying to escape this castle. In one bit, he leaps into the ocean, you can see there, and he sees that the ocean floor is covered in skulls. What are all these skulls doing? When he climbs out of it, he's in this room, and there are some clothes drying by the fire, and they look like his clothes. Like, what's going on? So he changes and puts on dry stuff. Why not? You're soaking wet, dry clothes, happy days. And in the end, he finds the room that he thinks the TARDIS is in. And in that room, he's faced with this, I think it's daunting, whatever it's called. He's faced with this diamond-like, incredibly hard substance, and it's a massive wall. And he knows, he's absolutely convinced that his TARDIS is on the other side of that wall. At which point everything makes sense, and he realizes that he's going to be in this prison for a very long time, because he starts telling the story of the little page boy. Really cut down version of it is, you've got the Sultan who is trying to find an heir. And he's asking around, he's trying to find the brightest child that he can find, and that will be his heir. And he asks the small boy, he asks him a bunch of other things, but in this particular scenario, he asks him about how long is eternity, how many seconds are in eternity. And this little kid says, oh, imagine this diamond mountain. It is huge. It takes an hour to go around it. It takes an hour to get to the top of it. And once every 100 years, a little bird sharpens its beak on the diamond mountain and flies off again. And when that entire mountain is worn away, that is the first second of eternity. So the doctor is telling this story. He's kind of narrating out loud because, well, it would be a strange episode if he didn't, I guess. He's narrating this stuff out loud. And as he's punching this wall, he is touched by this hooded figure. And he starts to die. And clearly he's burned, he's no longer able to regenerate, and he's going to die. But he crawls back to the start. He hooks himself up to the teleporter that he appeared in. Kind of sees there was a skull there as well. Kind of next to him. And with the last amount of his energy, he triggers the teleporter again, and the doctor teleports into that place because of latent energy signatures or words along those lines. Now, I'm sure fancy words could be used in the explanation of that, but that'll do. And then this carries on going. And over the course of the episode, you start realizing just what this doctor is going through. Because he is there for 4 billion years. And he knows that every one of those skulls at the bottom of the ocean is his skull. And to be able to carry on going, punching this incredibly difficult wall, gives you a sense of resilience. I love this story. And it's a very, very good one about resilience. And for me, resilience is not a static trait of a person that either exists or no longer exists. A lot of people talk about resilience as a muscle. It can be trained, it can be enhanced, it can be developed. I like to think of resilience a bit like insurance, because there's a lot you can do to grow and build your resilience when you don't need it, such that when something bad happens, you can rely on whatever your resilience mechanisms are to try and cope with the fact that something bad is happening. Resilience is an awesome thing. And it too can be nudged. You can develop this not by suddenly removing a mountain that's a mile tall. You can remove it one little bird sharpening beak at a time, and just do this over a long period of time, because this is not something that will ever stop. There is a really nice book by a lady called Amy Cuddy, and if you don't want to read the book, there is a relatively short TED Talk where she talks about, I think the title is Faking It Until You Make It. She's talking about presence and being confident in a room and being able to stand up and do things. And in her talk, there's also lots of books in here as well. A lot of other books is in here as well. She talks about just little things like standing in a certain way and kind of being open, and the Wonder Woman thing, kind of sticking your hands at the side of your waist. Stand like that for a couple of minutes. You feel more powerful. You feel taller. You feel more able. And over time, you start to believe your own myth a little bit more and more. You start to believe that you really are strong. You really know what's going on. You really are, in some sense, in control of some of the challenges. And then you start acting more like you know what's going on, and you've got assertiveness and so on. And it's a nice, positive, reinforcing loop. And all it starts with is just by standing in a relatively silly way, like this. If you're watching me on the camera, I've currently got my arms up. Just stand like that for a couple of minutes. It's very silly. You feel very silly at the start. But in lockdown times when nobody else is around, I mean, this is the best possible time to do it. If you need to have a sense of privacy in a Skype call or something, you can switch off your camera, put a piece of paper over it. There's always a way of just finding a little bit of time to just do something like this. And it's brilliant. It really is awesome. So there are other things that happen. I mean, if you imagine the effect that just standing in an open and tall and proud way can have on your psyche over time, imagine the both positive and negative effects that the things you do at work can have on your sense of your team. Now, normally when people think about how to get better as a team, sort of as a proxy for how to improve resilience in the team, one of the first techniques that springs to mind is a retrospective. The first events that happened is a retrospective. Okay, what happened? What went wrong? What can we do? There's always opportunities to try and get better, and that has a nice proxy for improving the resilience in the team. But retrospectives, have good effects, and they can potentially have bad effects, especially if they're ineffective or bad retros. So a good retro that's run in a safe environment, everybody knows it's a safe environment. But key, it's not that it is a safe environment. Everyone must know it is a safe environment. Otherwise, by definition, it's not a safe environment. If, as a result of your retrospectives, things change, somebody says something, it's a brilliant idea, as a team you implement it, that has boosting effects on both the team because they're getting better, but also the person who came up with the idea, because it reinforces their need for significance. The need for significance is about the need to be noticed, the need to matter, to mean something. And as a purveyor of a lovely idea, I mean something, I matter. That's good for my sense of self, sense of significance. The fact that we're doing this stuff as a team reinforces your love and belonging needs, which is also really good. And all of these things, like we talked about before, allow you to tolerate greater demands on yourself around uncertainty, around contribution. It's not something I would suggest, I'd recommend, but contribution needs are around stepping out, trying to go the extra mile for your teammates because you want to help them. That's the contribution need. People have a need to contribute, to do something for people. It's a great need. It should be met by everyone. But it also means that by reinforcing all these other areas, we are able to do more, which is really cool. But the last one is really important. Given a choice of an ineffective retro or not having any retrospectives, I will take not having any retrospectives. Because if you don't have any retrospectives, you don't have the morale sapping effects of a whinging shop where the same things keep coming up in a retro and nothing gets done about it. And then another 2 or 3 weeks later, the same thing. That's really demoralizing. People switch off. People stop engaging with the team that you're in because it doesn't matter and you're going through wasted effort. So I would watch out for that sort of thing. But that is the obvious ways of kind of helping and build resilience and build your ability to tolerate uncertainty. Pretty much every technique there has got an effect in some way, shape, or form on your psyche. And before I lose too many of the non-developer types, test-driven development is a really interesting exercise in managing cognitive load. But I will restate that so that it's more generally applicable, and I will talk about a general problem-solving approach, of which TDD could be an example. in order to solve a problem, there are loosely 3 main categories of thought process that need to happen. There needs to be a lot of thought about the problem, to actually understand it, to work out the implications of it, and to just get a handle of what it is that you need to fix, and therefore detect how you fixed it. You also need to think about what it is you're going to do to solve this problem. You're going to have to think about your solution options. You've got to work out pros and cons. How is the fit of your solution options against the problem? How do you make the right decision about what exactly you're going to do? So you've got to think about the solution. Lots of that effort that needs to happen. You also have to think about when you stop, because you've solved enough of the problem that you don't need to do anymore, because there are other mechanisms to solve the problem. Let's say manual intervention might be how you solve the final 10%, and you only need to deal with the 90% of the scenarios. Whatever your problem that you're trying to solve, you have to work out when you've finished. So in TDD land, that is writing your unit test first, that's writing your software, you're writing your solution, your class, your method, whatever. And the final one is about refactoring until your code is good enough for you to stop refactoring. The reason that's really good for managing your cognitive load is it can help prevent you from being overwhelmed when you're faced with a very large problem. Because as a first step, you can slice it up into 3 parts and focus on one part at a time, which is about managing the cognitive load, managing the amount of stuff you've got to have in your head when you're trying to do things. And so therefore, you're able to tackle bigger problems for any given level of effort and stress that you have to endure. It also means that you know that you have got this structured approach to dealing with problems, so you have a little bit of certainty in your kit bag when you're faced with a highly uncertain or highly novel problem. There is a little bit of certainty that you can stick to. I will just follow my process of breaking it up into 3 parts, problem, solution, and then when to stop. And that little bit of certainty can help you deal with the little bits of uncertainty. So that makes sense. Just a few other techniques. It could also be your non-functional requirements could help you manage your stress levels and your ability to deal with uncertainty. So if you've got maintainability as a really important non-functional requirement, you know that you have to build your software. Again, I'm going to assume it's software because that's most of my history. You're going to have to build your software in such a way that you know it will be maintainable, it must be maintainable, by somebody who might not have seen it grow from day one. That has a lovely side effect because it also means that when you look at this thing in 6 months' time, it is much easier for you to work out what is going on. Far less cognitive load, therefore far less stress associated with trying to keep up with all of the stuff that's going on in your head. And most techniques, and this is where some homework is needed for you lot, because it is worth thinking about techniques from a stress or psychological safety or resilience perspective. And it is worth trying to work out how to tune these things so that you have better human outcomes, in addition to better software development outcomes. So now we're going to flick to the Jamboard. So Corrado, can you stick the URL on the in the chat? So what we're going to do is work on some quiet time where we think up some stuff. The Jamboard, for those of you who have not used it, is a glorified whiteboard. I will flick through so you can see it as well. I can see some people starting to join. It's a free Google thing, so as long as you've got a Google account, you've got access to this thing. It is a virtual whiteboard. It has a very small number of tools. It's got markers, so you can draw on things. You can use it for doc voting, for example. It's got an eraser, because if you're going to draw on something, you really should be able to delete stuff with it as well. It's got the ability to add post-it notes. Ah, yes, I see somebody has found the ability to move the little picture. Yep, exactly. So it's not a problem. Slide 1, frame 1, the one that you're looking at with the TARDIS and the planet and the moon, that is the playground area. That is for people to kind of work out how to use Jamboard, get to grips with it, to have a play. On the left-hand side, you can start seeing the controls you've got. The one just underneath the arrow looks like a post-it note. That is the tool we're going to be using. And that allows you to add post-it notes. So if you click on it, you get a little pop-up, sticky note, type something in, like test. In fact, that's rather dull. Just say,
Zach, are you going to share the screen on the board? So, are you going to share the screen of the board?
Okay, I thought I had. Am I not? Oh no, that's the bigger part. Let me share my screen. There we go. Yeah, apologies for that. I thought I was sharing my screen. Right, so you can now see my my screen, hopefully, and the Jamboard is on it.
Yes, yes.
Excellent. Oh, look, somebody's been attaching. Awesome stuff. So what we're going to do is we're going to work on pages 2, 3, and 4 if you want to. And I'm going to flick back to the slide so you can see the instructions. So you should be able to alt-tab between the Zoom window and the Jamboard. So that's actually fun. So I'll leave the Jamboard, the Zoom window with the slide so you can look at it. What I would like you to do is look at 2 or 3, pick one. I would recommend having a think about frame 2, slide 2, the kind of paging controls are at the top of the page, and think about, from a nudge perspective, what are the kind of nudges that you could apply to your team and your teammates such that the technique, and on page 2, I have got the daily stand-up, the end of iteration demo, the retrospective, and the iteration planning session as techniques. And on page 3, I've got a whole load more things in there. So feel free to choose anyone that you're interested in. So yeah, nudges to help you either be more effective as a team at executing that technique, or help you as a team develop psychological safety or resilience, or to have more fun with it, things that will make your team happier about this event. It really is entirely up to you, because you're going to decide what you want to do, whether or not what you want to focus on, whether or not it's functional or behavioral or whatever. If you start finding that we're running out of screen space, you can shrink your post-it notes as well, just to kind of free things up. And afterwards, I will generate these as PDFs and I'll share them on Meetup, so you'll have a copy of it. The link will remain active. I have no intention of getting rid of it for, well, probably all of May at the very least. So if you want to go refer back to it, by all means do so afterwards. As an example, I have put one in green against daily stand-up, because one of the things that I found really difficult with my teams is, because I have multi-time zone teams and we're all distributed, we cannot have the stand-up as the very first thing we do in the morning. It has to be sometime during the middle of the day, which means people are working, which means our ability to suddenly stop whatever we're doing, especially with thinking about stuff, is very, very difficult. So one of the things that I thought would be a lovely nudge is just 5 minutes before stand-up time, just flag up that it's 5 minutes to stand up. It helps. It's a bit like a curtain call, I guess, in that sense. And so, yeah, feel free to carry on. I will stop talking and I'll start typing as well, because I want to get involved with this too. Some of you might have noticed different colors. minute or two more. I see page 2 is nice and full and page 3 is empty. That's absolutely fine. But if you wanted to talk about a more functional specific item like story splitting, story writing, anything tech related, I've just added like 3 things in there, then that's where you can do it. But again, one of the things that I'm not going to do is run this like a normal sort of consulting whiteboard session. So I'm not going to come up with themes or anything like that, because that's not the purpose of this session. The purpose of this is to help give you ideas that you can write in your own books. So as long as you're starting to think about this stuff, and as long as you know what it is you want to take into your team, I'm happy. It's meeting the objective that I set for this exercise. Okay, so my rather crude PowerPoint animation now says that time is up. Obviously, this being a different website, you are able to carry on using it. So I'm just going to carry on chatting about the episodes. And if you want to carry on working with that, that's cool too. All right, so down next to episode 4. And episode 4 is the fact that the doctor isn't always right. This is a really cool episode, still from a really, really awesome episode. It's called Turn Left, and there's this creature that attaches onto the back of Donna Noble, pictured in the foreground here, and all it does is it tweaks a minor decision she made in her life, and the idea is that this little creature just lives off the potential between what could have and what didn't, and what actually happened. But in her scenario, that turning left meant that she did not eventually end up meeting the doctor, which means that at the right time, she was not able to persuade the doctor that he needed to leave the room that he was in, which was under the Thames, which means that the doctor died in this alternate world, which also meant that the stars started going out, and it was a terrible thing. Really bad things were happening. That, if you're the team lead, if the person that you expect to know all the answers is not right all of the time, there are 2 ways you can deal with that, fundamentally. If you're the sort of person that believes that you have to be right all of the time, and those of you who are aware of a fixed mindset or have a bulk of a fixed mindset are more likely to be the sort of person that believes that they have to know all of the time. It's not a judgment call, it just seems to be a direct causal effect between mindset and that response. If you have to be right all of the time, and you are working close to the limits of what you actually know, that is a horribly stressful place to be. Because you're always on the edge. Potentially somebody will ask you something that you just don't know the answer to, and you might have to make a guess. That's a horrible thing. And it can result in bad defensive coping mechanisms, either by shutting down conversations that aren't going the way that they want, or by just kind of diverting, changing the subject or whatever else. So I'm not going to spend too much time talking about fixed or growth mindsets. There's a huge amount of literature out there, but the fixed mindset end is essentially you have defined constraints. And that's it. That's what you've got. Whatever these constraints are, you're either within them and everything's fine, or you can't go beyond them. That's it. The growth mindset is slightly different. The growth mindset is all about the ability to learn. So that as long as you're able to learn, you're happy. Because that growth mindset is happiest when you're in a learning mode. So interestingly enough, if you have a growth mindset, being right all of the time is frustrating more than anything else, because it means you are nowhere near the limits of what you are, what you know, which means you're not really getting a chance to grow, which is a bad thing. So, being able to cope with this level of uncertainty is important no matter which way you are. Now, from a coping mechanism and dealing with this mechanism, there are a bunch of things you can do, and you will be able to invent a whole load of them. I'm just going to bring up some of the ones that I like the most. And by far, my favorite word at coping with this is the word yet. Because it turns a closed, defensive, depressed, I can't do this sort of sentence into something that has not closed the door, has so much potential because you are going to solve it, because it's now, I can't do this yet. And the same is true for any other negative closed sentence. The word yet gives you a massive number of possibilities, and it behaves like a nudge, because it also signals to everybody that hears it that the fact that something is impossible to you for now is not a problem, and it might allow them to open up slightly about the things that they are unable to do, and it helps try to build a safe space where it is okay to be wrong. Actually, this reminds me, one of the nicest things one of my teammates a long time ago told me was the reason he absolutely loved being in our team was because, and he was the one who kind of articulated this to me for the first time, which is when it really sunk in, but none of us was afraid of being wrong at any time to anyone or in any scenario. It did not matter to us that we were wrong as an individual, because as a team, we all knew that we had each other's back. And being able to create and grow and evolve to a team that works like that was brilliant. I think it's something that everybody needs to experience at least once, because then you know what it's like to live in an awesome team. So that's the word yet. Brilliant word. There will be others, but that one is mine. Reframe the events that happen to you. Avoid thinking in the negative. Find out what it could mean. Find out what you can learn from it. And Edison's quote is one of those kind of standard sentences, standard phrases that people use when they try to talk about a growth mindset. It's not a bad thing. It's an experiment that did not work. I have learned something from this. I now know to try something different. And the restating of negative scenarios as opportunities for evolution, opportunities for growth, the language itself helps you get past a lot of the problems. One of the things I've seen, certainly with teams new to Agile and are trying to adopt Agile language and Agile techniques and try to kind of evolve a mindset, the word failure is still quite a dirty word in their places of work or in their organizations or in whatever, sometimes even inside their team. And so people use synonyms. It's not failure. We have learned fast. We have adapted quickly. They try to avoid the F word because the word has connotations of fear for them in some way, shape, or form. And as humans, we have fear in all sorts of things. We also have fear in the use of the word fear as well, especially if you're talking to somebody and we talk about fear, and they say, oh, no, I'm not afraid, I don't have fear, I'm merely concerned about something going wrong. That is still in the fear category of emotional responses. It's not as intense as primal fear or anything like that, but it's still in that family. But the word itself seems to have quite a lot of power over a lot of people, and a lot of people are afraid of the word. So sometimes you have to pay attention to that, and that could be one of the challenges that you need to work out how to reframe so you can get past it. Hopefully that made some sense. But I've started talking about awesome teams, and I think meerkats are the standard animal representation of a team, especially a team with multiple perspectives that each individual brings to the party. So you've collectively got lovely coverage. Gratuitous metaphor, it's been used a million times, but it was a pretty picture, so I thought I'd use it. If you can get to the state where you can rely on your team to have your back, that takes away an awful lot of the stresses about having to be right. I think I mentioned this already, but it's really powerful because teams are the unit of worker in sort of an agile context, and that's how we should be thinking about work. Teams deliver work rather than a set of individuals deliver work. So the more you can cultivate high-performing teams, the better. Now, if you're in the lucky situation where you are working in an incredibly high-performing, tightly knit team, that is incredibly daunting for people outside that team. And these are just some of the things I have heard stakeholders and just outside observers talk about some of the teams I'm trying to work with, and usually the end state of these teams, because by the time if I'm successful and I've finished, they are one of these like highly effective gel sets of people, and it's an awesome team. So if you're a member on the inside of this brilliant team, it's very easy to forget the world as others see it. And a little bit of empathy can go a long way to kind of reducing the stresses associated, particularly with joining a team like this. I can't really get a straw poll, but I'm going to assume that most people on this call who work in teams have team members who come and go, because over the life of your membership of a team, you'd have had some new people come and you'd have had some established old hands go for whatever reasons. So the churn of people into and out of teams, I think, is given, particularly when you've got contractors as well, where everyone has their own styles, ways of working. It can be very difficult to work out how to join a team like this. If it is hard to join a team like this, there's a pretty good chance that even inside the team, you've got a bit of a two-class system at play. You've got an inner core, where the culture originates from, and you've got a bunch of people on the outside who know how to participate, but potentially they're suffering from an imposter syndrome. They don't really know if they belong in this team. They're part of the team from an organizational perspective, and they'll do their part and yada, 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 but they don't know if they quite feel it in quite the same way as, you know, words like sycophant potentially get used, as words as these kind of cultist core in the middle. That sounds terrible. I don't mean it in any negative sense. It's just that level of emotional connection with your teammates. It's quite an interesting thing. So this brings us on to the next exercise. So if you could flip back over to the Jamboard, this time flip over to page 5. Oh, I see we've got a couple of post-its on story sizing. Awesome, thank you. Page 4 was a page left blank in case we wanted to add extra practices, but I don't think we really needed to. Flipping over to page 5, it's just a blank sheet. What I would like you to do is think about your team right now. If you have just come out of a team and you're joining a new team, think about the team you're joining. If you've just come out of a team and you're not joining a new team, you're working on your own or whatever, then think about the last team that you've left. But bring a team into focus. Ideally, a team that you can do something about. What I'd like you to do is think about that team and think about what you can do or change or tweak or nudge to make it easier for a new starter to join that team and for that new starter to integrate well with that team. Because there's an interesting side effect of thinking about your team from a brand new outsider perspective. It is a really good way of identifying random bits of jargon that you're using inside of your team, things that might make you a clique and have an inside and an us and an outside and a them. That stuff is quite divisive. So if you can identify these sorts of things and get rid of it, such that new people can join more easily, a nice side effect is that the people who are already in your team, perhaps feeling a little bit like an imposter, they will integrate a little bit better, because the advantages that a new person will get are advantages that they will enjoy too. So that's the Mr. Miyagi wax on, wax off advantage you will get, but the context of a new person just makes it easier to think about things in a more simplified manner. So, ooh, I see stuff is happening. Oh yes, I like that one. And you can see my really lame PowerPoint animations of a TARDIS rematerializing. So if we can take about 5 minutes, as you see.
Well, Zach, just to feel this moment of silence, one of the participants highlighted the fact that we as a community are collecting retrospective every event. So this is perfectly fitting what you were saying about the retrospective usage. So this was coming from one of the members, but this is also a good reminder for me that at the end of the event, I will share the link with using which you can do your feedback. You can write something about this event, about the speaker, about the organization, and what else. So before leaving, please add your comments to the event.
It's all about nudges, right?
Absolutely. Nice playback. Awesome. Right. So my little timer says time's up. Thank you for that. And again, you will be able to go back and look at this if you want to, or as you're trying to write things out, you will have ideas spark up. And if you think they're good enough to use with your team, brilliant. Go for it. Okay, thank you. Right. So let's move on to episode 5. The doctor's job is to save people. This is the Fires of Pompeii. It was a really cool episode because it also had Peter Capaldi in it. And it's referenced when Capaldi becomes the doctor because he chooses Zach's face to remind himself. It's really interesting because during this episode, the doctor turns up and realizes, thanks to a bunch of soothsayers, that Vesuvius is not going to erupt. But Vesuvius erupting is one of those 6 points in time, which is fancy speak for it must happen, otherwise bad things will occur. And at the end of the episode, he manages to kind of sort the problems out, and Vesuvius duly blows up. But Donna, the companion at the time, kind of sees the inhumanity, sees the human tragedy that's in this. And at this point, we really need to park historical accuracy, because if you know somewhat what really happened, then yeah. But let's park that for now. So Donna sees the human tragedy and just begs the doctor to remember why he's there and just to save someone. So he saves this family. And that kind of being running around, being stuck in the details of what it is you're doing, particularly if you're in a role in a team where the work you're doing is quite exciting, like you're a developer working on some tech that you've never used before. It could be really interesting, and you can get stuck into the stuff that you're doing, that you forget why you're doing it in the first place. And this is a nice little book. I can't remember how old it is, but it's a few years old now. So Simon came up with this golden circle concept and then expanded it to be a golden cone, because he talks about it as an amplification effect and being able to amplify the messages that you need to give out. But what he was talking about were these 3 levels of facts. The stuff on the outside, the stuff that you actually do, the what you do, is very visible. It's very obvious. You can see it. And when you talk about what you do, you engage with people in their neocortex, the part of their brain that deals with language, with speak, with rational thought. That's the part you connected. So when you talk about what you do, it's a very logical, language-based discussion. When you talk about why you do things, you're connecting with the limbic system. You're connecting with emotions. And that's why at the start, I told you about why I wanted to do this. I have to tell you the emotional connections I have with ideas and why I like sharing ideas. Otherwise, the stuff that I do, what I do about talking about these sorts of sessions, may or may not be congruous with the why I'm doing things. And that is something that as humans, we're really good at spotting. We can tell if somebody's insincere, but that's because what they're doing does not match what we think is the answer to their why. Because we cannot directly observe the why, we have to infer it based on what we're doing and what we think and how we've been told about this person. And in fact, what this person says is the answer to their why question. And I know that sentence can get really confusing because I've used what and why a bunch of times, but those three levels. And it's that why from a team delivering software perspective is usually articulated in a shared vision because it needs to be communicated. It is something that could be inferred if you spend long enough observing, but it's very hard to infer the why somebody does what they're doing or why a team is doing what they're doing if you've got a very small amount of time with them. So the term shared vision isn't that new. I know it appeared in Peter Senge's book, The Fifth Discipline. He talks about a shared vision as being an important factor. The thing about shared visions is that they are co-created by everybody, and it's their collective vision is what is shared. Because if you don't have everyone, again, for some definition of everyone, part of creating that vision, then it isn't really the shared vision. It's more of a communicated or imposed or a suggested vision, whatever the right word is, it depends on the context. And everybody has their own perspective, and I love the idea about the five blind men and the elephant stuff, because everybody has their own view about why they are part of the team trying to do whatever it is the team are trying to do. And the pictures on the right are from, I think it's from the Agile Samurai. It's Jonathan Rasmussen's work, which again, I think, from what I can remember, came out of ThoughtWorks as well. So if you're working in ThoughtWorks, you would recognize this stuff as being sort of quite important as a good way of starting a project, starting an engagement, starting a mission, if you want. So I don't think I need to over-labor the point about visions. Just the key bit about it, it must be shared. And because it's the answer to a why, it needs to connect somehow on an emotional level. Because if it only connects on a verbal or a logical or rational level, it's probably a lot closer to what it is you're going to do rather than why you exist and why you're trying to do what it is you're going to try and do. So it needs to have an emotional connection, be it laced with emotion or mere hints of emotion. It sort of depends on the environment you're in, but it needs to connect with people in that way. Otherwise, it doesn't have the power that a vision does, because a vision needs to sustain you long after specific instructions have passed, because in highly uncertain times, you cannot work out what the instructions are. Individuals need to work out the next best thing to do based on their understanding of that vision. So we're going to dive in. As you can see, I'm diving straight into exercises. We had a nice slow start just to warm you up, and now we're going to go in to the final exercise of the session. I'm sure you know what to do. These are the four main challenges to having and organizing a vision workshop that I have seen when I've gone to visit client teams, clients, projects who don't have a vision or don't have a documented vision or have a vision in a strange form. And I think we need to have one in order to reset what it is we're going to do. But what we're going to focus on, because some of these challenges are involving stakeholders and diary management, and they're not necessarily things that we can deal with in a call like this. What we're going to focus on is just two of these visions, which could also also apply to just the team scale. You don't necessarily have to get all of your stakeholders into a room. You can focus on what the team's shared vision is as a team rather than necessarily as a project. And that is the second one. We've survived this long without one. Why do we need one now? And the fourth one, it doesn't matter because we don't have a say in what we do as a team. Those are the most common team-sourced reasons that I've heard about not having a vision. So this is slightly different. So if you could flip over to frame number 6, you can see a hand with vision challenges and even a nod. This is how I'm going to split you up into 2. If your age is an even number, please look at the bit on the left-hand side. We've survived this long without one, blah, blah, blah. And if your age is an odd number, and by odd I mean the whole divisible by 2 thing, not a particularly weird, strange number, then please look at the one on the right-hand side. Think about what you would say to somebody who is telling you this as a challenge. So I would like you to argue the reason, the cause for having a vision workshop when this is the argument against. So if you've got 5 minutes, start away. The advantage I find with thinking like this is it helps you think about some of the challenges that you're going to face. If you think a vision is a good idea and you're trying to gain some buy-in and gain some interest in your, not necessarily your team's usually on board, but your organizational level as to why we should invest in creating a vision. And thinking about these sorts of challenges and coming up with reasoned, rational discussions and arguments for it, and doing that in slow time means you're not necessarily caught on the hoof when it's faced in real life. Nice question. Some people are going for questions. Awesome. So that's 5 minutes by my timer, and oh yes, we've got loads of stuff and a couple of rakish angles. Cool. Thank you for that. Again, the whole FOMO thing. Not when you have access to this stuff, you can read it. It's about you coming up with ideas that you can use, and who knows, something might have sparked some stuff here. Not necessarily in Vision Workshop, but in an entirely different context. Anything's possible. So for me, one of the things, and I think I saw a couple of post-it notes which talked about people. A really big factor, in teams delivering things that are genuinely valuable is if they understand who their client is. I don't necessarily mean who pays the money to fund the project. I mean, who's going to use the system? Who is going to gain some value, or who is going to have their day job, essentially their livelihood dependent upon the stuff that you produce. And there are just a bunch of techniques that we can use to try and bring the real humans that are having to use what we do into this picture. There's been a lot of work over the last 10-ish, 5 to 10 years about user experience and design thinking and things like that. And that is about actually building some empathy with the poor person who's got to use the application that you're building. There are a bunch of things you can do. You can obviously invite them to where you work, but watch out for some of the logistical nightmares, because who's going to pay for their expenses if they work in location A and as a team you're based somewhere entirely different. You could actually go visit them, but again, watch out for disrupting their day. If your user base is call center staff, those poor lot, their time is measured down to the minute. So your visit would not have been factored in as a break time for them. They will still have their daily targets to meet. So watch out for things like that. And there are a load of techniques you can use. You can use empathy maps like this shaky sketch that I've drawn on the right-hand side. You could come up with user personas, but again, watch out for creating grotesque caricatures about a person and creating an unreal persona. If you're researching your users and your potential users, it's worth doing it on a regular basis, because user needs change over time, because it depends on what these humans are going through. Business software and business users tend not to have the same variation on a day/week basis as members of the public who are interacting, say, in a consumer mode. But also use user needs as a reference, because you've got to understand if it's genuinely a user need or just a bit of pain that a person is trying to describe and there's an underlying need somewhere. And treat the stuff as a set of hypotheses that you can use for development. So you don't know if it'll work, you just believe it might do something. So you need to switch your mode into testing your theories. Now that last one is quite an interesting headache for requirements management as a general discipline, because quite a lot of requirements management is really about a hypothesis which somebody is codified into a bunch of requirements, but it gets crystallized into an absolute set of facts, which may or may not, which is reasonably true for business software, generally not true for consumer or citizen software. So, watch out for actually building preconceptions about what your users are, who they are, what they need. This is a nice example of when not understanding your users can go horribly wrong. So this is cakes. You might have told by some of my examples there, I have a bit of a sweet tooth. So General Mills, American company, post-World War II, using all of their expertise in ration packs, because they built food packages for the U.S. military. They were quite good with dry foods and packages and stuff that you could cook by just adding water and heat. So they were coming up with ready cake mixes, because they knew that their traditional customer base, the 30s and 40s American housewife, they don't have a great deal of time because they were working during war in munitions or whatever else, and now that they're back post-war, why would they give up work? Work gives you a huge sense of freedom, a sense of purpose, sense of self. They don't want to give up work, so fine. How do you help these time-poor American housewives make delicious cakes for their families in as little time as possible? And they came up with a bunch of these cake mixes. And it's brilliant. All you have to do is use whatever's in the pan and add water. So there's cake, there's icing. They even had foil pans that you could bake it in. The earlier attempts at selling this stuff were very meh. They sold a few, but it just wasn't selling the way. I noticed I did not say like hotcakes. I was so tempted to say hotcakes, but as you can see, I did not say hotcakes. They just weren't selling, and it didn't make sense because this was a cake. This was a cake that you could make really quickly. What was going on? So the marketing people got some psychologists in, and if you've ever watched the TV series Mad Men, you will understand the marketing people and the psychologist types that they're brought in. The psychologists realized that this cake mix was devaluing the person who was using it, because it was no longer a housewife, a chef, a cook baking a cake for their family. It was somebody working on an assembly line producing a cake out of a factory. So they changed the instructions. All they said was told them to add an egg. Because by adding an egg, all of a sudden, assembly feels like baking. All of a sudden, the skill of the person who's making the cake is important. It isn't really. I mean, just add an egg and it's exactly the same. But just that made their audience, their target audience, feel so much better about themselves because it was suddenly baking again. And now it sold like hotcakes. Now it definitely sold in huge quantities. And that's the kind of orders of magnitude difference you can have just by understanding who your users are. So, no Doctor Who series, certainly in recent events, would ever be complete without a Christmas special. And this is a lovely story. This is about the caretaker because the Doctor was in hiding. And this bit is just about common gotchas. Watch out for cargo cults. Places that are going through the motions of doing the agile ceremonies but haven't got the mindset. They think of their old world models, but they're just using different language and different terminology. So, the rhetorical question, when is a product owner not a product owner? When they're a message taker, for example, when they have no say in the product, they're merely conveying data from stakeholder to team. Another thing to watch out for, I think I've touched on it already, but pay attention to jargon, because jargon is a really divisive thing. It suddenly creates two classes of people: those who know the word, therefore are the in, and those who don't know the word, who are therefore not in, out, the others. So Scrum is great. Scrum's really simple and lightweight. But my biggest problem is words like sprint, because sprint is what Usain Bolt used to do. It's not necessary, or if you're an American, it's a telecoms company. It is not necessarily a block of time that you repeat. DSTM uses the word time box, which is pretty good. A lot of the other methods use iteration, which is also pretty good because it also suggests that you can be iterating over time. But watch out for jargon, watch out for divisive language, because that also creates the us and them barrier for crossing, which might be daunting for somebody who's, say, like a subject matter expert. Should be part of your team because they know the problem domain. But if they're nervous about joining, that's the problem. The hero pattern. The hero pattern is horrible for teams to be nice teams where you've got collective ownership and a bunch of peers working together. You can have skills, that's fine, but hero is one that kind of does it all. The problem we have is, just as a species, we really like heroes. We really like the uber individual. This is just a small collection of logos that shows you just how much we like heroes, but it's a problem for teams. As a profession, as an IT industry, we're not really professional in the way that I expect engineers. The picture on the left is the Institute of Civil Engineers in London. That is a 200-year-old institution. So the checks and balances, the accoutrements of an industry, like all of the letters of accreditation that you have after your name, if you've got a civil engineer with a string of letters, that means a lot more than a person with, say, CSM or a PSM behind them. It's not to say that they're a bad person, it's just that the letters themselves do not carry the same weight. And it is a mistake to believe that they do. It's something that we have as an industry we need to be careful of, because we keep talking about the software, the engineering industry. We keep using language of a profession that is more professional than we are so far. That's fine. Their manifesto is only 20 years old, so it's a function of time. Be wary of capitulating too early and too often when it comes to pushing the boundaries of what you can do with mindsets, with behavior patterns, with agile techniques. On the one hand, extreme end, you've got the idealist who you must do things the way the textbook says, otherwise it is not agile. They don't get anywhere in the real world of messiness. Similarly, if you always comply with the messiness status quo, you're back to a cargo cult implementation, because you're not really moving the culture along. You're not really helping the teams get better. So there is a balance. And I was looking for a picture of Shaw, and this is one of the coolest ones I found. And I just brought that in because I like his quote. And this is an interesting one, so personally for me. Beware of evolving way beyond your environment. It's not necessarily a problem that young teams will go through, but if you are a very mature team, the kind of team that doesn't need to bother with stories documented with acceptance criteria, because at the right time you will grab the product owner or whoever understands it, and the two of you will work on it, and you will not stop working on it until it's done and delivered and the real consumers are using it. If you're that kind of environment, suddenly realizing that the rest of the world hasn't moved on can be quite depressing if you're not careful, because you'll still have to participate in the world outside your little highly evolved agile bubble, but it just would feel horribly leaden. You just won't get the same value out of it as you would have done had you not evolved quite so much. So it's just an interesting thing to watch out for. Lovely old story by H.G. Wells about this person who ends up in a valley where everybody's blind and he can see. Interesting story. It's a very short book. So that's essentially all I had to say. This is a recap of what I thought we covered, at least what I wanted to try and cover. Happy to take questions. I shall see if I can share and still look at the questions. But if there are any questions, Corrado?
Hi, Zach.
Any questions, Corrado?
Well, actually, there is one question from me, but again, all the attendants are invited to add their own. Okay, I have a question that is this one. You talk about retrospective. Okay, it's one of the view that you share, and I was just curious to have an idea on, I don't know Doctor Who episodes like you, okay, like you do, but how many episodes are in the past, in a retrospective view, to change the past, to change the future, and how many of them are in the future to understand what the action that we are doing today can impact in the future? Just to have an idea if we can use this to understand if we have to focus on the past or focus on the future. Make sense, the question? Zach, are you stuck for this question?
I think you killed him with his question.
Yeah, it was too stupid, probably.
I find it interesting.
Okay. However, if now that yeah, good. Are you here?
Yeah, sorry. I think my internet decided to.
Okay, no problem, no problem. I mean, it's just a curiosity, but while writing this curiosity had in my mind some application. I mean, there are episodes in future in Doctor Who and in past, okay, that are happening in the past or the future, considering the actual time. So I was wondering, is more common for the episode to be in the past or in the future? And if we can use this information to help us to analyze, let me say, in retrospective or in forecasting?
You know what? There have been a few people who've been in Doctor Who over the years who have re-emerged as more major characters. So Freema Eisman, she was in Torchwood Tower in the day. Getting random bits of feedback. In the day that the Cybermen
You need to go on mute.
Yeah, Karada, maybe you should go.
Okay, I put on mute. Go ahead, Zach.
All right, cool. Right, so yeah, so there were a few episodes where people have come back. So Freema Eisman, she was in Torchwood Towers, and then she later appeared as a companion. Gillian, Karen Gillian. This is Gillian. She was in the Fires of Pompeii as one of the soothsayers. And then she's appeared in a bunch of other things. So that's another person who's randomly appeared. So given that we now have both genders at play, and thanks to the last series of episodes, we also have non-white actors at play. It could be anyone. I don't know. Sorry, you're mute now, Karada.
Yeah, but are the episodes happening in the past or in the future?
Oh, sorry, I'm clearly misheard you. And it depends on when you are, doesn't it? There's been a lot of
the actual
that
time, I mean.
in recent past, as in before 2019, because there's always something that reasonably connects to some news item. They bring in actors that talk about news to play newscasters. So that tends to be reasonably current. There used to be a lot of stuff in the past in a lot of the earlier Doctors, particularly like with Bill Hartnell, because it was quite educational in that sense. Yeah, so I think there've been more episodes set in the past than in the future, but there've been a bunch that have been in the dim and distant future, including at least one which is at the end of time, which is the episode just before the one where the Doctor is in the castle. I think.
The one that you mentioned, yeah. And do you think that we can use these statistics as a lesson learning also for our perspective with our teams? I mean, focus on the recent past, sometimes in the future, but not so often.
So okay. So in terms of how far back you go, you know, it's an interesting one, because if an event occurs often enough for it to be worth doing something about, then it'll be there in the recent past as well. You can obviously have cyclical things as well, things that will only happen once every 6 months. So 6 months ago is still recent for something of that scale. So I don't think the absolute time for your retrospective duration is important. It's more about what it is you want to try and focus on and improve. And a lot of retrospective techniques is not about what happened in the last iteration, what can we do for the future. That's a part of it. But a lot of retrospectives are about focused improvements on a specific thing. So, for example, you can use the retrospective to work on your cultural model inside the team. You can use your retrospective to focus on how you do show and tell. You can focus a retrospective on how you do user surveys and user research. You can target an action or an event. Therefore, the time is not important. Did that answer your question?
Yes,
cool.
Actually, yes, Zach, actually, yes. Just another question, because I cannot see any more question. Again, just for my curiosity, is there an episode of Doctor Who happening in, let me say, a similar COVID-19 time?
They probably wouldn't be allowed to film it, right? Social distancing.
There is at least one, which is about the highway. This is the episode where they meet the face of Bo when he's in a great big jar, and you have lots of cars stuck on a highway. They're all in their self-isolation cars because they've got entirely closed ecosystems. It's close because the reason that happened is because of a deadly plague that was sweeping the planet, and one of the things that the face of Bo did was he tried to get as many people into cars and lock them into the motorway where it was safe. Best I could do at short notice.
Okay, okay. Now we have some good comments, and I would like to ask to people that are still connected to fill the survey for the feedback that we mentioned before. I copied the link in the chat. So if you have 2 minutes to do that, please do it. Zach, what can I say? I'm impressed. Actually, this is my first comment. I'm impressed. You know that I like crossover, so I never seen something like that. So there are a lot of good insight for me. I take a lot of notes. I'm recording, just for informing people that is still connected. I'm recording the event. At the moment, we have not taken any decision if we want to share, how we want to share, what else. We have some idea in mind, and probably in the next future, you will be, in the close future, you will be noticed for that. However, thank you for joining. Thank you, Zach, for sharing. I really like it, you know.
Awesome. And partly your fault, you know, because we're drinking and this idea came up. So it's usually
a good session.
People don't know the story of this, but because it was just in front of a couple of beer, I remember that evening.
And I will share a PDF of the slides. I'll keep the Jamboard up. I'll also, whenever it is I'm going to delete them, I'll create a PDF and do that as well so people can have a copy. Because I'm quite happy for people to
if you can share the PDF of Jamboard, it could be helpful.
Cool.
People can download the
PDF of Jamboard, it could be helpful.
Yeah, you can download the Jamboard yourself if you click the 3 dots beside the share.
Okay. I will share on the link.
And
okay,
I'll
thank you, David. Thank you also for the point during the event. Okay, great. Again, see you next week, and thank you again, Zach, for sharing.
Thanks, everyone.
I can wait to see you again in front of the beer. Bye.
Bye.